better for me, right?
It may be better for the community temporarily, but at the end of the day, that costs taxpayers money.
Actually, Camden saved over $80,000 on its police force, even after training new officers, and they got more of them. Look, I want cops in our communities where they protect and serve, but they've got to be held responsible for their actions, and they aren't when they are backed by a union.
There's a strong argument to be made that we need to get rid of police unions entirely. They sort of had to, destroy it in order to save it.
Now, if you haven't noticed the media fanning the flames of all this divide, well, then you're just not paying attention. They are controlling the narrative and trying to keep us in fear, and the inconsistencies and hypocrisy and political agendas along with media narrative continue to ramp up. So now, as we head into another complete lockdown with a one-size-fits-all mentality, it's starting to feel more and more like a police state.
It is necessary to shut things down everywhere, and that includes Utah, Wyoming.
We now have drones on beaches watching us.
Volusia Sheriff's Office, please adhere to social distancing guidelines.
And the way they're counting these numbers is getting more dicey by the minute.
Anytime healthcare intersects with dollars, it gets awkward. Right now, Medicare has determined that if you have a COVID-19 admission to the hospital, you'll get paid $13,000. If that COVID-19 patient goes on a ventilator, you get $39,000.
You can't trust the CDC, who's admitted this week to overinflating positive test results in a mix-up.
The determination of the cause of death is a big deal. It has impact on estate planning. It has impact on future generations. And the idea that we're going to allow people to massage and sort of game the numbers is a real issue, because we're going to undermine the trust. And right now, as we see politicians doing things that aren't necessarily motivated on fact and science, the public's their trust in politicians is already
The deaths are still being recorded under such strange circumstances.
Orange County Health Officer Dr. Raul Pino telling us one person reported to have died from COVID was killed in a motorcycle accident. So was it removed from the data?
I don't think so. I have to double check. We were arguing. We were discussing and trying to argue with the state. Not because of the numbers. I mean, it's 100. It's not make any difference if it's 99. Yeah. But the validity that the fact that the individual didn't die from COVID-19, died in a crash accident. But you can actually argue that it could have been the COVID-19 that caused him to crash. So I don't know the conclusion of that one.
So now you're telling me that COVID-19 is causing car crashes. Yet we accept what they told us back in episode 6.
When I'm writing up my death report, I'm being pressured to add COVID. Why is that?
And then I saw this from the public health director from Illinois.
I just want to be clear in terms of the definition of people dying of COVID. So it means at the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. So that means that if you were in hospice and had already been given, a few weeks to live, and then you also were found to have COVID, that would be counted as a COVID death. It means technically, even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death.
And then the question was asked at a White House press briefing. And Dr. Deborah Birx, the White House Coronavirus Task Force Coordinator, said this.
So I think in this country, we've taken a very liberal approach to mortality. If someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
And so from Ngozi Ezike, the Director of Public Health for the state of Illinois, to these doctors from California, to the White House Coronavirus Task Force Coordinator, way I understand it, if you have a heart attack and you go in and you just happen to have COVID, well, then it's a COVID death. Liver disease, the flu, anything. Why are they doing that? So many conflicting news stories are surfacing, creating even more confusion now, and the media with the big stir stick of fear. Schools are canceled in most parts of California. Now Nevada teachers are encouraging schools to stay closed. I'll be honest. If my kids were still in school age, I think I'd be keeping them home this year. Not based on anything other than I don't have enough credible information to determine whether that's safe or not. And I personally would keep them home, at least for now, without the information, because when you boil it all down, everybody is still saying, well, we really don't know. I mean, no need for these alarms going off as far as learning, because statistically speaking, homeschool kids do better in academics. They also do better socially as well. The parents and the teachers who now have 2 jobs and they're worn out. What about their social interaction? What about being isolated from friends and the change in routine? It can't be good. And everyone is looking for someone to blame. This really has turned into the biggest shit show in the world. And the rest of the world just shaking their collective heads as are many Americans at this point. This response that our government insisted they have total control over.
The CDC decided that it was going to make its own test.
Was woefully unprepared for.
The number of tests available in the United States is nowhere near the national demand.
We can't properly quarantine people, and we're obviously quarantining people that do not have COVID-19.
We didn't do testing fast enough, nor did we do enough testing, because
when labs tried to develop their own tests, they came up against a bureaucratic requirement that forces these labs to seek FDA, quote, emergency use approvals.
Hundreds of these machines are currently in the United States, but they're not allowed to test for the virus.
Not for coronavirus,
because you need FDA approval.
Yep.
Meanwhile, in South Korea,
Koreans have driven through this clinic, takes 10 minutes, and you get results in 2 to 3 days.
650 places throughout the country where you can be tested, between hospitals, clinics, and these pop-up drive-through centers.
Finally, this last week, the president said, just get it done.
We had some very old and obsolete rules that we had to live with.
There's just only so many people that can provide care, only so many beds that exist.
The White House is easing some federal regulations to make more hospital beds available.
The FDA announced emergency use authorization of a new on-site test.
We have a shortage of doctors and nurses in South Florida.
Waive certain federal license requirements so that doctors from other states can provide services in states with the greatest need.
Allow out-of-state licensed physicians in good standing to practice in Massachusetts.
And now we're up to 600,000 tests per day, but it's pretty much spread everywhere now. And with so much conflicting information about just how dangerous it is, we don't know what to believe. And that continues to divide us further. So many opinions on masks and how dangerous the disease is, and because of the mismanagement of information spread by our government officials, ladies and gentlemen, we are at a crossroads in this country. So we are brought to this pass. It is a huge historical moment. The loud, grinding noise of history pivoting has drowned out rational dialogue or sensible decision-making. All this divisiveness, and that has fragmented rational thought by fracturing our concentration. Does this sound sensible to you?
If we see continued noncompliance, they'll wind up facing misdemeanor charge, and DWP will step in and shut off their water and power.
I believe it is time for we the people. You remember we the people? It's time for we the people to take back our government, as it was intended for us to do, and why the Constitution was written. I believe it's time for a convention of the states, as written in the Constitution of the United States of America. And on the top of that list, we need to end term limits in the Senate and Congress, but blow out that cesspool of arbitrary laws and the endless seam of political corruption and maneuvering once and for all. It's time for new leadership, not just at the presidential level, but all of Congress, all of the Senate. If you don't know about the Convention of States yet, and our rights as true leaders of this country, you and I, well then Google it, because that's where we're heading in episode 9, which will be a live nationwide broadcast podcast. And we're going to have some very special guests, some of who wrote a very simple and easy to understand book on the Constitution and how it pertains to you. Word by word terminology that all of us need to know and understand. We'll discuss the Convention of the States and what that means, and how we, the people, can make an earth-shattering change for the future of this country. I've said it before and I'll say it again. What this country needs right now is true leadership. And we're being let down on every level. From the mayors of our cities to our governors, congressmen, senators, and president of the United States. And looking at our choices in November, the future looks bleak at best. Episode 9 will be out next week. Finally, I want to leave you with this. Because of all this divisiveness, I've seen so many of my friends and family members disengage. Disengage in this national discussion of this pandemic, race, and the election. If we disengage, we fall into a trap of those parties more interested in division than unity. Being engaged is beyond just talking. We also need to listen, not shut out, even if it's sometimes uncomfortable. I don't need to tell you that emotions are white hot across the country right now. People are angry, more angry than I've ever seen in my lifetime. People do want to talk about the state of this country, and that's good. But sometimes people use the wrong words. Words that others find incredibly insensitive. And in that raw moment, the backlash is instantaneous and it's harsh. That's where it gets complicated. Because the harshness stills the dialogue. And then we all suffer for it. Let's not stop talking. We need to talk about these things. And if the speaker errs, well, the correction should come with love, not hate. And when the correction is made, it should be thoughtful, with patience, not anger. We don't just need to have that form of constructive dialogue. We have to have it. Because a country divided cannot stand. Until next time, Americans, this is Chad on Demand, keeping it real.